The views expressed in this episode, as well as all episodes of Mistaken Identity, are solely host opinions. The content here should not be taken as indisputable fact. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Welcome to Mistaken Identity, the podcast that invites you to discover unity in every tradition. I'm Phoenix Kevlin, and in each episode we explore the timeless wisdom woven through mystic teachings, religions, and spiritual philosophies, all leading us to a deeper connection with one another. Imagine you're sitting in a quiet room, turning the dial on an old radio. You hear static, bits of voices, and music kind of breaking through the noise. Essentially, the station is already broadcasting, but it's not until we tune in that we hear the message. So what if the divine works the same way? I mean, radio frequencies are constantly going through us, literally going through us all the time, and they're available all the time. So it's not till you tune in to that particular station that you actually hear what's being broadcast. For most of my life, I was taught that spirituality was about inviting God in, as if we were empty vessels waiting to be filled. But what if God, what if the divine, the beloved, is already here, already broadcasting? What if the real choice isn't about inviting the divine in, but about whether we ignore it or choose to align with it? This realization or revelation, whatever you want to call it, struck me while reading the Taittiriya Upanishad, one of the ancient Hindu scriptures, and it completely reframed how I see spirituality and what I was taught when growing up. So I'm going to try to put this into words, what I experienced. And before I do that, I just want to apologize that there's been quite a long break in me doing any podcasts. I added more things to my YouTube channel, and it took me a bit of time to figure out the pacing and the arrangement to do all of those through the week with my other responsibilities. And so it's been a little bit of a juggle trying to get that figured out. And the other thing too is that I just didn't feel like this podcast was, it's a work in progress, I guess. Because even the last ones that I did, I just felt weren't going the right way. And I think maybe I'm relying a little bit too much on scripting, and it's kind of coming across like rehearsed or whatever it might be. So this is going to be a little bit of dabbling back and forth and seeing what hits me. I guess a lot of it was that I did a lot of planned material, and this particular podcast feels more organic when something hits me at the moment. And this particular one that I'm talking about today was something that hit me this morning while I was doing a meditation, doing some transcendental meditation, actually. And now that I look back on it, it was a combo of things, because before my TM session, I was reading part of the Upanishads, and then I went into my meditation with that, and it bloomed into something else. So, moving forward, the specific portion of the Taittiriya Upanishad that I was reading was the section to the householder, and it would be in part 2. I think it was 2.1. And it reads, "From food are made all bodies, which become food again for others after their death. Food is the most important of all things for the body. Therefore, it is the best medicine for all the body's ailments. They who look upon food as the Lord's gift shall never lack life's physical comforts. From food are made all bodies. All bodies feed on food, and it feeds on all bodies." Now, I know this doesn't sound like much, but it compelled me to allow myself to open up to the divine and let this expand, because there was something else there that I just had to allow it to take form. And to do this, it's something that I've had to learn to do for myself. So I'm not suggesting that other people do it, but it has done wonders for me and my journey. Basically, I had to put aside my teachings growing up and my programming. And this particular exercise took me a very long time to develop, because part of my programming was the fear of putting my indoctrination aside. Literally, just there was a lot of fear that was built into that if I decided to think or ask questions, I actually do remember that from a lot of like my Sunday school, that if I asked questions, it was a bad thing and that I wasn't supposed to question God. I was always a little bit frustrated by that because I always thought that you learn by asking questions. And so to ask and be rebuked for it, I guess, just felt really, really weird to me. But I mean, at the same time, it also kind of raised my eyebrows. I thought, like, what is it about this that I can't ask questions? Just seemed really weird to me. But anyway, I had to put aside that fear in order for me to do this practice of just putting my learned thoughts and my indoctrination aside. And with that, I had to realize it's okay to do, I can put it down like a coat, and then when I need to, I can just put the coat back on. But then the other part of that was that in doing so, I had to ask myself, am I insecure about my beliefs? Such that, like, I should be able to put them down, and if they hold true, I should be able to put them back on. Not a problem. If I'm feeling like in doing so, something is going to convince me to be stolen away from my beliefs, then one, how strong was my convictions to begin with? And two, if something is able to steal, quote unquote, me away from my beliefs, well, then maybe that is the truth I should be pursuing. So once again, it brings me back to, I believe asking questions, opening myself up to the divine. If it's a path that's been laid out in a journey, then quite possibly part of that path is asking questions. I have to relate that to the fact that if I was physically on a path, on a hike, or some kind of a journey, there would be times along that physical path that more than likely I'd have to consult a map or ask questions. So why should a spiritual path be any different? Anyway, I'm getting off track. Probably why I relied on scripting before. But getting back on, I had to realize that, getting back to that fact that I had to realize that with putting my indoctrination aside, that if it was true and I was steadfast in the truth behind it, I can easily just come back to it. I guess essentially, now that I think about it, it's like saying I can attend a buffet, so to speak, and I can notice the spread and dig it. And if I'm satisfied, I don't need to digest anything. But if there's something that I want to try, then it's okay to give it a try. I can always spit it out. I don't know. Maybe that's a poor analogy, but for me, it works. So for me to do what I do currently is that I put aside my teachings and programmings about the divine and my relationship to it, and I let that meditative self allow for possibilities. To do this, I'm going to kind of come at it from a different direction, but hopefully if you stick with me, this will all tie in the end. So here it goes. The journey in this meditation began with this particular thought. If I were to assume that the divine is already in me and not obtained through invitation, but already present, and it was experiencing its creation through its creation, could the instructions in several spiritual texts and mystical experiences about, eating, fasting, caring for the body, could they be more the divine saying this is how to maintain the body such that I can experience creation in its optimal state, rather than just aimless rules that are intended for discipline and structure? Essentially, like really boring experience. And actually, now that I come across that, that's very interesting because to look at the divine as saying this is how to maintain the body so it can experience that experience to its fullest has a little bit more excitement, a little bit more passion and pizzazz behind it than just boring rules that you have to obey because it says so. A little bit more passion behind the one. Anyway, what happened was that thought of the divine always being in and just through seekers having mystical experience, understanding the diet or the exercise regime or whatever it might be to keep the physical state and an optimal performance such that the divine can experience it, it led me to this thought. And this is where it kind of opened up a gate. And I love when that happens. And I guess that's the thing for me. I've learned that by putting down my programming, I get to kind of play a little bit with spirituality. And once I found that I could kind of play with it and just take parts and just keep exploring it and letting the divine, that still small voice speak, and I get to play with it a little bit, it becomes really fascinating. And it truly starts to open up into a journey. So getting back to where this opened up the gate, just a little bit of backstory was that I grew up in a Plymouth Brethren tradition. It's very, very serious. And I was taught that a person had to invite God into their life, that spirituality was about accepting God and then following a set of rules to abide by his will. And that's really truncating it down to something very basic. I mean, it's a whole world of stuff. Clearly, if anyone's seen the Bible, it's a very thick book. So I'm not going to just reduce it to that small summary, but that does give an idea as to the fact that it did come across as a set of rules, and that you do, essentially, the main part that's important is that one has to invite the divine into their life. But now, as I open myself up to the teachings of, say, Hinduism, Taoism, Perennial Philosophy, just to name a few, I've come to see a different perspective, one that actually resonates more deeply with me, and it feels more organic. It just aligns right. Because these traditions don't start from the premise that the divine is absent and needs to be invited in. Instead, they begin with the profound truth that the divine is already in you. So it's not a guest waiting for an invitation. It's the very essence of who we are. And this changed everything for me in a great way, because I was able to take that and then put back on my code of what I've learned. And those passages from what I grew up with started to make a lot more sense to me. So it changed everything for me. It meant that spiritual life isn't about getting God to enter our existence. Instead, for me, it became about choosing whether or not we want to recognize and align with what's already present. At least for me, what that did was it changed the responsibility, and I felt more responsible about my relationship with the divine. Or to put that is that I had more of a responsibility to honor with that point of view. Which, there's a phrase from Alan Watts that I've always loved, and I carry it with me. But once I kind of had this perspective, it gave it a lot more passion. And it would be, you are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and experiencing itself. And this perspective shifts focus from seeking the divine externally to understanding that our very existence is an expression of the divine experiencing creation that it created. I hope I'm really delivering that well. This also brought new meaning. As I said, I'm putting back on the coat and seeing, does it align, or am I really off here? But in doing so, it gave new meaning to a Bible verse that I was taught as a child. And I'm sure anybody with a Christian background, or at least a fraction of it or whatever, this is going to sound very familiar, because there is a Bible verse that says, "If you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire and it will be done for you." Has a nice rhyme scheme to it too, I guess. And I've seen some people, in my view, the way that I kind of look at it, I've seen some people believe that means that if you believe in the Bible, then you should just be able to ask for stuff and you'll always get it. If your relationship with God is cool, then you should be able to ask for whatever you want. It could be, I want a specific type of pickup truck because it's the best, or I want a raise at my job, or I want a promotion, or I want this person to like me, or whatever it might be. And I think that that's really not what the verse is about. Especially now with applying what I got from if the divine is always in us and we're supposed to maintain who we are such that it can experience its creation through its creation, then the way that I read this now, and actually I'm going to get away from say read this, the way that I experience this now, because it's a part of my experience. But the way that I experience this now, that particular verse, is if you understand that I already abide in you and you choose to care for that presence properly, you will understand what to ask for because your desires will align with divine harmony. I mean, another way of putting that, and it might not be the best example, but for me, it just very quickly makes sense, is that if you have a spouse or if there's a loved one that you just know through and through, and it's a birthday or it's Christmas or it's Valentine's or whatever anniversary, whatever special event is coming up, you're going to know what that person, like what gift is really going to knock it out of the park and what gift is going to just fall flat. And that's the kind of thing that I'm looking at with this verse now, where it's if you abide in me and I abide in you, you'll ask for what you want, it'll be given to you, is the same kind of thing that if you are really tight with this relationship and you're caring for it and you're nurturing it, then in that way, you will know what to ask for because you're in line with the divine. So this shift in perspective also reframed the way that I looked at spiritual guidelines, things like dietary laws, fasting, rest, moral conduct. And when I was younger, these were presented as rules. Do this, don't do that. But with what that meditation of mine had, I tend to want to look at that differently now. So if the divine is already within us, if we are its vehicle, for example, through which it experiences its creation, then spiritual practices are not arbitrary. They're more like a maintenance schedule for the body and mind, much like a maintenance schedule for a vehicle or your car, whatever it is that gets you round town, I suppose. So let's think of a car. If we ignore oil changes and tire rotations, the car doesn't stop being a car. It just doesn't function as well. Likewise, if we neglect the conditions that allow the divine within us to thrive, we don't lose our divinity, but we may find it harder to connect with. And I'm going to get back to that losing the divinity thing, because eventually in time, if the divine is ignored to an extent where it's non-recognized anymore, then it's just not recognized anymore. But I really don't want to get into that. Just getting back to the fact that if we neglect the conditions that allow the divine to experience creation through its creation, then we may find it harder to connect with. Or even if we think of how our car will give us signs that something is not right or it needs attention. We can choose to do what's necessary to get things right, or we can choose to ignore it, push it aside, turn up the stereo louder, more distractions, right? So as to make the problem disappear. We can do the same with the divine. And as we push it aside and bury it with distractions, the conditions will suffer and eventually we'll lose that working relationship, which is interesting. So what if we treated our relationship with the divine the same way we treat our relationship with our cars? And I mean, I've seen some people that are very passionate about their cars. I've got one friend that whenever he details his car, he's got old toothbrushes that he's saved. And so to get into like all the creases and all the detailing and whatnot, very, very meticulous about cleaning his car. And then you got someone like me, I like keeping my car clean, but I'm not passionate about it. But what if we did treat our relationship with the divine the way we treat our cars? I mean, we read the owner's manual for the car. We get fussy about the gas we put in. We wash and vacuum it. We get oil changes to maintain it. And if we're so diligent about the well-being of a machine, why wouldn't we extend the same care to the vessel carrying the divine within us? And I'm convinced that the early seekers and sages and mystics, in their mystical experience, that's what they were trying to communicate. Of course, they didn't have cars as a reference tool for a relationship with the divine. So for me, this turns religious practice from burdensome obligations into acts of alignment, so to speak. They become ways to honor the presence of the divine in our lives. And this realization has completely changed the way I read scripture. And when I revisit the Bible with this new understanding, I see things differently. They're still applicable and everything is still relevant and the words aren't changed or anything, but it's just that the way that it was taught to me comes across in a different way now and still holds its truth. So instead of a text that says, invite God in and follow the rules, I see a message that said, God is already here. Will you embrace or reject that reality? And this isn't just a Hindu or Taoist or perennial philosophy idea. Mystical traditions across the world hint at the same truth. Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, the kingdom of God is within you and all around you, not in mansions of wood and stone. Split a piece of wood and I'm there. Lift up the stone and you'll find me. The divine is already here. The only question is, are we tuning in or are we tuning out or turning the dial away? Or even just shutting off the radio altogether. And as I was saying before, this shift in thinking has made my spiritual life feel less of a struggle and more like a process of remembering, aligning, and fine-tuning my own awareness. Instead of asking, how do I invite the divine in, I now ask, am I pushing the divine away? So I just invite you to reflect. You don't have to, but if you want to put this as an exercise of just taking off your coat for a little bit and embracing something and then putting the coat back on, just a couple things. Like, have you been living as if the divine is something separate from you? What would happen if you started seeing the divine as already within? And what would it mean to maintain your body, mind, and spirit, not as a way to earn the divine's presence, but as a way to keep yourself tuned in to what has been there all along? Anyway, that's just a fun little exercise for myself, and I thought I would share it with others. Just a thought in my meditation today that's really stuck with me, and I feel is really important. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And when I say that, I truly mean that, because another thing that's opened up for me since I stopped holding on to my coat, let's say, as ownership, and saying that my coat is the only coat. The one thing that's changed in my life is that I guess I used to enter into conversations with people of different beliefs. One, as almost maybe I had to defend mine. And two, feeling like I had to convince others. And the thing that's changed for me in doing this is that now I look at things more as a way to just have a conversation, just drop my need to either defend or convert or whatever, and listen. Just open it up as a conversation. Listen. I found that you learn a lot about people. I'm more fascinated now with why a person is passionate about their belief more than just what do you believe. Because the root system, why a person is passionate and why it excites them and why they hold on to it, that's a little bit more life-breathing than just, what is it you believe and why. I'd like to know more of the passion and what compels a person to keep believing what they do. And so that's what this little practice has opened up for me. But in regard to what this podcast was about and the whole thing about if the divine is already in us, then the mystical experience that we've been reading about from others is talking about maintaining that physical form such that the divine can experience its creation through its creation in its optimal state. In regards to that, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, and feel free to share your reflections. So thank you for joining me on this exploration of mistaken identity, where we uncover the unity within every tradition. And I hope today's journey inspired a sense of connection with the shared tapestry of spiritual wisdom. And as we reflect on these insights, please remember what unites us at our core. And if today's episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and share it with others on a similar path. So join me next time as we continue to uncover the wisdom that binds us all. And I wish you and your loved ones all the best. Have yourselves a wonderful experience. And bye for now.